Well, Happy New Year. This is Ken Warchol. I'm the retired bee inspector who is now a civilian beekeeper, and I'm here at Doug Partridge's house with his hives, where we're going to demonstrate to you how to keep your hives alive for the remainder of the winter months. This is a tough task and probably the toughest part of the season for the bees. So, at this point, whatever we're going to do is going to be based on how successful you were earlier this fall, because the fall preparation is key to successful wintering. In other words, did you evaluate your queen, and do you have a dynamic queen that is doing her job and has already started brood rearing? Have you maybe missed a supersedure late in the season and the queen didn't get mated, and therefore you've got a drone layer that might be in that hive? Or did you treat for mites? And if you didn't treat, or treat in a timely fashion, or with the wrong treatments at the wrong part of the late season, you may have mite problems that have carried over. So there are a lot of factors that could affect the wintering from this point on. Because, for instance, if you had a higher mite level than should be going into the winter season, you're going to continue to have the mite problem through the winter season, and associated viruses that they may vector from late season robbing as well. So if you had late season robbing from dead hives, you may not even know, and as a result, that continues to expand itself through the winter months, and by March you have a very small cluster or none at all, depending on what you've done from this point on. So the fall season was key, and from this point on, you're only going to be successful if you did successful fall management. It's so important. I can't emphasize that enough. And as a result of that, we're going to take a look at these hives and talk about some of the issues. But let me talk just a little bit about the dynamics of what's going on. This past season, we found many hives that ended brood rearing early in October. And as a result, those bees that were hatched out the beginning of October with no more bees hatching after that, you had not too many young bees into November. So as a result, most bees in the winter months live only 4 months. So that takes you through November, December, January, and February. So the bees are going to be dying off if they hadn't started brood rearing. On the 2 hives that are run for the NASA program and have temperature monitors, and 2 of my own hives that I keep on scales and temperature gauges, I found that December brood rearing is quite common in a lot of my hives. As I've been opening them, they're fairly strong because the brood rearing started early on. The dynamics of a hive are such that most of the seasons I've seen, and most beekeepers see, the brood rearing goes on up here in the northern climates till about the end of October, early November. And then the queen ceases laying eggs, and they go into the winter break, and then they start up early in January. But this year, with the early ending in October, in many hives, not all, but I've seen in many of my hives, first, second week of October, no more eggs, and I don't know how many calls I got. People thinking they had no queens because there were no eggs in the hive after the 10th of October. But as I went out there, we found the queens. It's just that it was a pattern in the whole area up here, and I understand in other parts of the north as well. So the dynamics happened. The queen, in normal circumstances, would start laying in January. They started in late December, the 18th of December on waterbite hives, and on the other hive, the 21st of December, the temperature was at 93. So at that point, you know they don't do that unless they're brood rearing. Otherwise, the cluster is at about 65 to 70 degrees without any brood in the hive. So what we are seeing, and what I'm seeing with my own hives, is that many are strong. And I knew that brood rearing, because of the temperature gauges, started in December. And so now the bees have come up through the upper super and gone through much of the honey, which is crucial for bees in the winter months to keep heat in the hive and to start brood rearing, which is even more honey and pollen needed. So we're going to take it from here. If everything you did right at this point, we're going to go into the hive and talk about what you need to do to complete the wintering of your beehive and have it to be a success. Here we are at Doug's second hive. We're going to be inspecting one of these hives. Now, what I mentioned is the fall season, you may have had plenty of honey in your top brood chamber, and we found that many of the bees settled in top chambers and never even went down the bottom in the late fall. They settled in at the bottom of that top super, and because we did have somewhat of a dearth, you may have had to fed a lot and obviously put much sugar syrup into your colony and hope that that would take care of it. And hopefully that's the case. But just keep in mind two things: that bees need to keep the temperature 65 to 70 through that cold winter. They've consumed much of that honey from the bottom of the top brood chamber where most of the honey was, because the bees settled there, and they started moving up slowly but surely, heating the honey up above them to use it for heat. And by this point, they're up through probably 3/4 of the way, or even all the way up in the middle of that top brood chamber. And they've started brood rearing. And as a result of that, they are now keeping a temperature of 93 in that colony. So they're consuming honey at a much faster rate. And I see a variety in my hives. Some are right up at the top and need substance to feed their young so that they don't starve and the heat can be kept in the hive. That's the dynamics of the hive in the winter. And if they don't have that, they're going to starve, the brood is going to die, and you will have lost a nice hive due to your negligence. So one of the things you want to start at this point on is checking your hive on a weekly or every 2 weeks at the minimum to see where the food supply is. Keep in mind two things: honey, in the case, sugar patties at this point, because of the fact that they can't feed them honey at this point. And the second thing is pollen patties. Or I'll mention to you, if you trap pollen throughout the seasons, that is much better, has much more nutrients than pollen patties, and the honey has much more nutrients than sugar syrup. But let me show you my strategy here in feeding. For the past 9 years now, I've been making sugar patties. I check my hive, and we'll do that here in the hive in a minute. And I can tell how high up the bees are in that top brood chamber. And if they're coming through the top hole in the inner cover, that means they're looking for food. They probably got brood there, and they've eaten all the honey around them. And if we got warm weather, they'll probably be okay. They can move out a little bit to get the honey on the outer parts of the second brood chamber. But if we get a cold spell and it stays in the 20s and 30s for a length of time, the bees have to stay with the brood, keeping it at 93. Staying over the brood, and with smaller clusters, because the older bees are dead, with smaller clusters, they've really got to constrict on those cold nights. And they can't warm the honey out to the sides or further out in the colony, in the top brood chamber. So we have to provide them with a source close to the brood where they can consume it, keep the heat, and feed the young. Keep in mind, they're using the sugar syrup, in this case, mixed with the pollen to feed the young. And of course, the sugar syrup, or sugar patty I should say, has no nutrients, whereas the pollen and honey have all that the bees need. That's why it's so important. And I'll share with you what I do here. One strategy that you can do, if you had honey bound, like we do in many years, the top brood chamber is honey bound, and you have no brood space, it's all honey, save those frames, put them in a freezer. And at this time of year, where the bees have gone through the honey in the hive on a warm day where you get 55 or 55 degrees. You can gently get in there, take frame from the way outside, take it into your house, and take one that you had from the fall in a room where the temperature is room temperature 68, 70 degrees. Don't ever take a cold frame from the very outside and try to move it next to the brood, because that chill of that frame, the cold being released, is going to chill the brood. So what I'm saying is, a frame that you've had in the house at least 4 or 5 days out of the freezer to get it to room temperature, and then you can gently put that right next to the brood frames, which we'll show you in the hive in a minute. So that's one option. And they've got food right next to them, or they got honey right next to them that they can use for nutrition and for heat. Now let me show you how I tend to make my sugar patties here, and this is a measure for short term to try to keep them sustained until the warmer weather and they can get their own nectar, or until you can start feeding sugar syrup or sugar syrup mixed with honey, as I do early in the spring season. So I take some water into the sugar and I start gently blending it. Good to use a latex glove. That way when you go into the hive, you're not all stuck up. Or take another pair of gloves to make your sugar patty, and another set of gloves to work in the hive. So I'm gently making all the sugar into a meatball. Okay, there you can see you don't want it too watery. You don't want this water leaking off of the edges of the wax paper that I'm going to put this onto the bees on a cold night. So you've got to make sure it's not too much water, but enough. So I'm going to show you the consistency here, and watch as I do this. This is very successful, better than fondant, I found, and the bees prefer it better. I've compared and had them in both in one hive, and you can see they go right to the sugar patty before they go to the fondant. And there again, I'm coming close here to the consistency that I want. And now what I'm going to do here in a minute is I'm going to form a meatball. You don't want too big of a patty, and that's why I say every couple of weeks you go in. I don't want it too thick because they're going to have to warm this up. I've got my wax paper right here, and I'm going to set this meatball. You can see here, this meatball right here, and then I'm going to make it into a half-inch patty. Going to bring it to the edges of the wax paper and tear off the excess wax paper. They will chew through the wax paper. You'll find that in the spring on the bottom of your hive, all chewed up wax paper. So you want them, and I'll show you when we go into the hive. There's my sugar patty on a piece of wax paper, as you can see here. And now what I do, you may not have this luxury, you may have to use a pollen patty to give them the protein they need to feed to the young larvae. But before I do that, again, you notice I've got some spring honey and some later in the fall honey, and I'm going to drizzle a little bit so they're going to get some nutrition. They're going to get some nutrition from this patty because the honey is in there And that smell of that honey into the sugar patty is going to bring them running. They're going to almost say, thank you, thank you. And here you can see light spring honey. And I'm going to just drizzle. Look at that nice spring honey and we got a lot of it in the spring. You can see here the patty drizzled some of the light honey in here. It's going to sink right into the sugar patty. And even some fall. The different seasons give them different nutrients, which is a balanced diet just as we eat. So that way, between the light and the honey, the spring honey and the fall honey, they're getting many, many nutrients. I had my morning doses of honey this morning, and this evening I'll be taking my pollen as well, just like the bees. I find it gives me that extra energy at night. When Doug's in bed sleeping, I'm up till midnight, full of energy. I'm sprinkling the pollen into the sugar patty to give them the protein they need. They can smell it. This is some of the spring. You can see the maple pollen in here, the green. This is early spring. I got fall, and I try to rotate that too, so they're getting fall and spring pollen into the patties. But you can see here, this patty is now ready. It looks good enough to eat. We're ready for lunch. You know, look at that. Doesn't that look delicious? Fall and spring honey, pollen. This is now ready. So when we go into the hive, you want to have your patty all made. If you don't have pollen, obviously, you're going to want to put a pollen patty. And I'm going to show you how to place it in the hive. So one of the first things you're going to do is you're going to be checking your hives. And when we're in there, I want you to obviously look at your hive from week to week when you go in, or every other week. See how many frames of bees are covering the hive. They should be slowly expanding outward, telling you this hive is working right. If you're seeing a shrinking cluster, you know something's going wrong. Because from this point on, there should be an expansion in your colonies rather than a decrease. And so that's what I always look for the help, because most of those cold days we can't go in and look at the brood, look if there's a queen. We can just visually, from the outside looking down, look onto the bees. And so as you go on a weekly basis, and by the way, today is a 39-degree day. This is, sometime it gets this warm, the bees are going to fly when you go in here into the hive. So you need to go in there gently, quietly, with a little bit of smoke, and not pry and vibrate the hive, because the bees will fly. And once they start flying in the colder temperatures and fly out a little ways from the hive, they may not be able to come back. They'll drop into the snow and you lose a good number of bees. I tend to like to go in the lower 30s. The bees are more tightly clustered, and then it's not as apt to fly. And I can slide the sugar patty in gently, the pollen patty in gently, and as a result of that, the bees are in that tight cluster. So I tend to try to choose a 32, 31, 32 degree day. And people say, well, geez, isn't that too cold? No, they're staying in the cluster. The heat is in the cluster. With the NASA scales, I can see the temperature gauge, the temperature sensor in the lower part of the hive. The temperature is only 4 to 5 degrees at most warmer than the outside temperature. It's only in the cluster that 93 degrees, and that's why with cold spells, you're going to see the brood isn't going to expand as quickly. If we get warmer temperatures and tend to get more warmer temperatures, that brood's going to expand more quickly, because they can keep the temperature that they need with fewer bees. If they have to constrict and more bees have to stay on those frames of the brood, you may even get brood chill brood on the outside, and they have to start all over again. but they're pretty good at dealing with how big the cluster is and keeping it covered. So I just wanted to bring out that dynamic also, and that's when it's best to do that. By the way, I also have, for some of you may try, as we're talking about pollen, trapping your own pollen. And this is an excellent thing to do, because pollen is essential. And rather than pollen patties, I've been using this now for 9 years. Once you start with the pollen, however, you need enough to keep going until March, when the new maple pollen starts coming in. This goes on front of your hive, and there's a draw here that goes here. And 1 day or 2 days a week, with all that spring pollen coming in, there's extra that they bring in, sometimes way too much. And this door opens up, so you can push this door open on the days so they can go through and bring the pollen into the hive. But 1 or 2 days a week, I close that. That forces the bees to go in through here. The pollen is pulled off their sacs into the drawer. And then what you can do is take and freeze it in baggies. And you'll have pollen to feed your hive in the winter months when it's essential. And I found my bees do much better with the pollen and with honey in the sugar patties than what we, for 40 years, sugar patties would give them, and no nutrients. So the health of the bees can't be as good. And there's a lot more research now on the importance of nutrition. Matter of fact, on our March 5th meeting, we're going to have a speaker, and Dr. Rangel from Texas A&M, talking about nutrition in bees and what we're doing to help the bees, and how important the nutrition is in the health of bees. Beside other factors, people for years and years kind of neglected thinking sugar syrup will do the same, or sugar patties will do the same as honey. No way. I found, like I said, in the last 9 years, just with the honey and the pollen, I found a nice expansion of brood, because everything they need. Be aware that most of the pollen's down below. If you get cold, you don't continue. They'll cut right back with their brood rearing, because there's no pollen, and they can't raise brood without pollen. So you need a pollen patty and sugar patty. And I like to put the honey to give them that nutrition from the honey. So let's now go into the hive to show you how we place the sugar patty and where to place it. That's important. Okay. Here we are again. We're going to go into one of Doug's hives here and demonstrate how to place the patty. What you see here is an insulated hive. Doug is designed as insulated hive outer part that you can, if you're interested in the insulation of your hives, you can talk to Doug by giving him a call on how that is made. So this is to keep the bees a little bit warmer, and especially in windy areas. It's much better for windy areas, and you got to be careful though when you use anything for insulation, and you over insulate ventilation so as not to cause condensation, which can kill a hive very quickly. Okay, so hopefully, like I say, as we go in here, we're going to see good signs, and we'll point out to you. So as I take this off, I take off the outer cover. There you can see the bees. They're all coming from the top. And we want to give them just a little bit of smoke. And you want to be very careful not to crack, vibrate. You want to very gently. Yeah. We're going to look at the, and I can see brood rearing has already started in this colony. Bees are spread out. It's a 39-degree day. This is what I was talking about. We don't want any flight, so we're going to gently give them some smoke. You can see the inner cover. You can see, you always want to check, make sure there's no moisture. That's a crucial item. If you're seeing black mold, a lot of moisture on there, that means you haven't got enough ventilation. And what you'd want to do is put popsicle sticks right on the rims at the four corners and then put your inner cover down, that's going to give them that extra opening to vent out the moisture, because moisture is worse than the cold. So I'm going to give them a little more smoke. You can see what I'm doing is trying to get them down so they don't fly, just like you would in the summer months. You can see they're going after the sugar patty here. We're going to move this sugar patty, which they've consumed a good part of. And you notice you got to take your time. You can't rush things. And gently, you notice here they're moving. We're getting them to move, move them. Get the smoke going to get them in that direction, off of the sugar. And we're going to place the other sugar patty. You can see here a little bit of pollen patty that he put on. Put on a riser. So see, the bees are very docile, and as I look down there, I can see there is no honey there. Right across the board, I can see even this outer frame is there's no honey. That's why they're up here, consuming this. You can see quickly. So, and that's where I'm finding with some of my hives as well. If I hadn't gone in, they would have starved. So it's crucial once a week to go in and take a look. And you notice how many bees. There's a lot of bees. So the more bees, as they grow, they're eating a lot of honey. So they've consumed everything down below. They're going from wall to wall here looking. That's why on a warmer day you'll find that. They're looking out here for honey all the way out to the edges. And you can see they're getting whatever they can. And we'll show you another way to gauge the weight of the hive. But here we are. Give them, come on girls, you got to coax them along sometime. They don't want to leave the food source. But you notice how gentle you want to do it so they don't fly too far, and get them all riled up so they're flying. Now a good thing during the winter months is to is, like I say, have a riser, because with sugar patties you don't want to squash bees. So what you do is you use a riser. This is a 2-inch one. A 1-inch one is plenty, but you can use the 2-inch riser as well. And this will give you room for your patty, and obviously keep the bees from spilling over. When these bees get strong, they can be spilling. You don't want them spilling over into the snow near the hive. So I put the riser on. I've got on all my hives, and so that anytime I don't feed them though until I need to. If I saw these bees way down in, here's how to test whether you got bees. Put your hand right up above the frames if they're down there to see if they're alive, and you can feel the heat on your hand. You can feel the heat coming out of that cluster down below, because it's 93 and it comes up, and you put your hand like that and you can feel, I can feel the heat right now through this cluster. As a result, they're producing a lot of heat here, trying to warm up any honey that might be there. But I can see it's these outer frames. And here's what you now do on a day that's a little warmer than today. You take out this outside frame with as few bees. Everybody can see this outside frame. You can just slowly get in there and gently I'm going to show you something here. This frame is light and empty, not a stitch of honey in here. I can see the next one the same. You can see here, and quickly you can do this. Look in there, looking, they're keeping it, getting every little stitch that they can that might be in there. And the pollen, particularly, I can see a little bit of pollen here and there. They're trying to get that for brood rearing. I don't want to, today's a little too cold, but what you could do on a warmer day, continue on like this into your hive. because we even shook at the Harvard University study I was part of. We shook bees at 37 degrees into a box to weigh them to know how big the cluster was, shook them back in, and they clustered, they were fine. Bees are more hardy than you think, but you can see here, apparently they went into the fall without too much honey, or they really consumed a lot here. But there's not a stitch there, but a lot of bees, so I know there's brood rearing further on. I don't want to open to chill brood. You don't want it. So right now there's enough bees there, they're keeping it warm, they're fine. But what I could do is take this frame of honey as I'd go on to where the brood, I'm guessing the brood, I can see where most of the bees are, right in here. This is where your brood is. And with that heat I can feel it's 93 in there, because I could feel that come through the glove. And so I'm going to put these back, because I don't want to, on a 50-degree plus day, you could go take your warm frame of honey and place it right next to the brood, the last brood frame out, and they will warm that up. They would take this frame and warm it up. And so I don't want to knock these off, because I put this frame in, but I don't want to stir these bees up and have them flying all off. So you can see here, I could stick this right in here, room temperature, and they wouldn't have, they could consume it almost immediately. 70 degrees they can consume it at. So otherwise, if it's ice cold from the freezer, right next to the brood, the cold that's emitted from this frame will chill the brood. So don't ever take an ice from the freezer, put it next to the brood. I've done it. I've seen what happens. The outside frame of brood gets chilled and dies, and they work for nothing. So here you can see, here we are in January, and I've got a hive up. Won't believe it, but this is going to affect 89 degrees. Not going to affect the bees out here. They're keeping the temperature as long as they're clusters. When they go out flying, they might not be able to come back in. But you don't see too many flying, and the ones that are getting, they seem to be getting back into the hive here. All right, so now let's put on this luscious patty. We're going to give them a treat. You can't be stingy. You can't just give them sugar syrup. You got to give them all this extra. They work for you very hard, and you put this on, they're going to have a nice treat. Look at them coming for the patty right there. So they've all clustered here because they're a little cool, but see how they protect themselves? They're all clustered to stay warm, so that none of them get chilled. They all take turns going in and out. We're going to put this down like this. I'm going to brush these off first. And then we're just going to give them a little, we won't even have to give them a tap. And here we are. Now we got the hive closed up. You know how many frames of bees are in there. Every week when you go and record, you see an expansion, and you get a 50-something degree day, you do the frame exchange. If you've got extra honey-bound frames that you took off during the season, rather than spinning out honey-bound frames, putting them back in, and all that work in the summer. You know, you got extra frames, freeze them, and now you got instant honey instead of sugar syrup, sugar patties. Much, much healthier for the bees. Now, we're going to close up. We've done what we need to right now. Now, when 50+ degree day, I'll go and check if there's brood very quickly though. At 50 degrees, very quickly check. Make sure the queen's laying. It's a nice pattern. Make sure that there's no puncture marks. Make sure it's not all drones, because that may spell that the queen ran out of steam, and as a result is laying drones, unfertile eggs. And so those are things you can check. With a strong hive, that you can correct them. Maybe make sure that everything looks normal, not abnormal as I call it. No puncture marks, no sunken cappings that might indicate disease, bacterial or viral disease, one of the viruses, maybe mites. They're puncturing because the mites are killing the young larvae. So many things that would tell you what's going on, and you might be able to treat early with Apivar by sticking scripts in if you think that the mite issue. And like I say, but in this case I can see much not, because you wouldn't have this strength of bees. I can tell already this is a healthy hive. Everything's going right in the hive. So that's what you want. So Doug did a good job, and he came right in. He fed at a nick of time to, I don't know when he started feeding, but obviously the nick of time to keep these bees alive. Now he's going to make sure that these pollen patties are constant until about the second week of March. The second week of March, he can go to 2-1 sugar syrup and honey if he wants, and put the honey with the sugar syrup, so they're getting some nutrition, as I mentioned, with the sugar syrup. And from March, second week of March on, you can feed the sugar syrup to keep them going, keep them alive. If he's giving the honey and also pollen or pollen patties, because they still may not be able to get down below where the pollen is and bring pollen up, and they'll cut back on their broodberry. So like I gave him pollen here already, he wants to make sure that he continues to give him pollen patties or pollen to carry them over. So now we're going to close up the top part of the hive here. And the ventilation looks good, so that is perfect. There's no signs of moisture on the bees. Greasy looking, wet looking bees, you get moisture and the condensation from the inner cover that's dripping down on the bees. When it gets cold, it freezes like a refrigerator effect. Dangerous. So the ventilation is good in here. He's got the insulation. We're going to close this part up. Oh no, we're not going to put this back up, because we're going to now go to something else that's obviously necessary, and that's cleaning out the dead bees on the bottom board. So in this kind of case, with this setup that Doug's got, we're going to have to pull up the front. Here. Gently, you don't want to rattle them. You don't want to rattle the bees. Okay, so now Doug's got his entrance reducer here with this 5-inch opening here that's open, and the bees are out here looking to get in. It's a warm day, the sun's warm here, so they can stay warm and still stay out here. You notice out here how these bees are moving around, and it's cold outside, 39, but the sun beating on them keeps them warm, and they're out here searching around. So what, you don't know how many dead bees he's got in here. So one of the good things every couple of weeks is to remove the entrance reducer very gently. And you have a little stick here, Doug, that I can get in there and brush them out with. Okay, let's take this gently out. Want to be gently. And what you do is you're going to come in here, you're going to see where any dead bees that might be in there, and this isn't a great deal. There's a few dead bees, but that's fine. What you've got to be careful of, that they don't block up the entrance. Let me tell you.
So the slot is pointing up.
Yeah, he's got the, you can have it down. I use down, he uses up. So if they fall, it's still up, raises up the entrance, which is okay. But in heavy losses, winter losses, like last year we had snow, then some rain after, it froze. The whole front of many hives was iced up. The ventilation couldn't get through, and we found bees that were all around the rim between the two supers looking in the air. They suffocated. Just a thick layer around all the edges between the two brood chambers. So ventilation is crucial. They need that to remove the moisture, and they need the air. So what happens is it comes in here, up through the hive, they vent it. It takes the moisture from their respiration, and honey, they're respirating, and there's moisture in the hive. You've got to move it out. So that sometimes that little notch isn't enough, so that's when you use popsicle sticks on the rims of your riser, and then put your inner cover on that, and I do that anyway on mine. That way it gives them, and it's tiny, so robber bees can't get in there. And as a result of that, ventilation is going to take your time. And the other thing you want to look for signs as you're going in here, a winter killer oftentimes is nosema. Looking for dark black, usually during heavy, long, cold spells like we had last year. We found high nosema levels in the samples, and a lot of the hives went down with high levels of nosema. So what you want to do when you open your hive is look for dark black. Bees can't get out to cleanse themselves. They eventually just have to let go. And the nosema multiplies much more quickly when they can't cleanse their gut from the, the waste that produced from eating the honey and the pollen. So as a result of that, it's important. That's another issue you want to look at is making sure you're not seeing signs of nosema, and you might want to, as the spring comes along, feed them in your sugar syrup. And it's good anyway to knock down the nosema spores. I went 2 years without it, and didn't start it last year in the nick of time, because last year we found, and I would have probably as well, except that I gave them nosema, Humidil B it's called. It's a new company, and I recommend feeding them a gallon or two of honey, of Humidil B, sugar syrup. So that's another thing you want to do here. A third thing, like I say, that winter from now, as we start getting warmer and warmer, they're going to consume, and more brood, they're going to consume more and more of that sugar patty, so you're going to have to probably put in there a little more than right now, because as they start consuming more and more, because there's more and more brood, you're going to find that they go through a patty in a week. And you don't want, I should have mentioned, when you place the sugar patties, I'm going to open this up for a minute, and you never want to place your pollen patty in your sugar patties. Oh, look at them all. Look at them going after that honey, huh? Look at that. Look at it right on there. I can see one chewing on the pollen there. They're happy as clams. But you notice I didn't put it over the center of the cluster, because you want that air coming up through the cluster carrying out the moisture. And so these bees right now are happy campers. And we'll close it back up. So if you're going to put a pollen patty, don't put it over the center next to the sugar. Put it on the opposite side. Put them on opposite sides so the center remains open, but you want to overlap both over the cluster, because you don't want it too far away, because they can't get to it and warm it up. So always by 2 or 3 inches, the pollen patty or in the sugar patty overlapping the cluster, so it's right nearby. You'll see the bees come over the top of it and underneath it, and they're going to warm that up. Right now they're taking down that honey that's coming down to the edges to them, all around there, it's circled, and they're consuming that. And this hive is one that looks in good shape, so placing your sugar patties and pollen patties, that's an important factor as well. Now, as far as a couple other issues with what you want to do, and I'm going to come to this side to look here at my sheet. Talk a little bit about 3 different things here. Mouse guards and entrance reducers. I just went out to a beekeeper here this last week there. They had the entrance reducer and the mouse guard. You want one or the other. Otherwise you're cutting off too much ventilation going in, air going through. So make sure your mouse guard or entrance reducer, whichever you choose, use one or the other, not both. And also, if you've got tremendous wind coming at the beehives, you might want to use bales of hay 2 or 3 feet out in front of the hive or around the hives to protect the hive from wind, heavy winds. And you want to, obviously, if you got heavy wind in it, that's all the more you want to put your plastic sheet in on screen bottom boards. I find people in the winter, and it tends to break on a heavy windy area, especially. We've had some on the USDA hives years ago where they were in a field, the wind came up through, we were experimenting, it broke up the big cluster into 3 or 4 or 5 little clusters that all froze. So wind is a factor, and that's where insulation is helpful, and also wind breaks at the front of your hive so that it's not whipping right in. And if you got screen bottom boards, especially so, but I wouldn't recommend screen bottom boards in the winter months. And as far as one other thing that I might mention here just is mice. At this point, if you've got mice that are in there, and I went out to a hive with a small little cluster, again, a week, even though I'm retired, I'm willing to help beekeepers to a certain extent get out there. And we went out, they thought it was a dead hive, but there was a small little cluster about this, and I could diagnose right away it was mites and viruses that had taken down. But there in the bottom, 4 mice chewed. They were nice and comfy right at the bottom in this corner back here on the frames. They chewed them all out, eating the pollen. The pollen was highly nutritious to the mice, and they were in there. And the beekeeper and I, we chased them out, and I told them at this point that cluster's not going to make it. At this point, you're best off just to kill off that small little cluster of bees. There was no brood, and it was a foregone conclusion. It's always sad to see. Whereas if you did everything right in the fall, you do everything right now to manage your hives, you can help them to survive. And you know what? On a good spring day, when you see those bees flying in and out with pollen, there's no greater pleasure. You know that you and the bees made it, and it gives you a sense of self-satisfaction like nothing. And I see even today, these bees are all alive. They're happy. They're consuming. They got their food. They got brood. They're doing what they have to do, but Doug's going to have to do what his part is. And he's done so at this point, so he's kept them alive. So congratulations, Doug. Keep up the good work. One of the things you can do, a nice little experiment, get yourself a 1995 indoor-outdoor thermometer with the wire and the thermocouple at the end. And what you do is take the wire thermocouple, put it in through the little notch in your inner cover, and you can put it down into the cluster. And that tells you what your temperature is in the middle of that cluster. And if it's 93, then you know you've got brood. So that's for a very inexpensive amount of money, and there's much more expensive equipment you can use. You know, the scale hives that I've got with all kind of sensors, and weight shows every ounce of weight coming in, or if a swarm goes out, how many pounds. You don't need that kind, but you can use a little scale, put it on, use a indoor-outdoor thermometer. These are things you can do to play with to see what's going on in your hive for very cheap. That thermometer, I still got 2 on my hives that tell me what the temperature is inside. And with the other hives, the USDA hives, I got the 2 very expensive $3,000 scales that are marking temperature and humidity and weight. So with that,